Okay, welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health podcast. Really excited about today's guest, Anna Lisa Somera of Rhaeos, which is a really exciting digital health wearables company that I've been following for some time now. Anna Lisa, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
I think we connected a while back. I saw, I think it was that you guys got accepted into the Cedar Sinai accelerator,
That's right.
which living out here in LA, I'm pretty familiar with that. I think that you were part of their initial cohort, right?
I think we were class 7, actually.
Oh,
If
was it?
yeah,
Okay. For some reason, I was thinking that was a little bit newer, but anyways, when I stumbled upon the technology and started checking it out, I thought, wow, this is something pretty special. It's definitely got some significant legs. So I'm excited to kind of dig into the product a little bit. But can you give a little background of the company, kind of what the genesis of it was, how it kind of came about, and then maybe how you got involved?
sure, no problem. So, Rhaeos is a clinical stage VC-backed medical device company that has its academic roots out of arguably the biggest wearables lab in the world. So it comes out of the Professor John Rogers lab over at Northwestern. And Dr. Rogers makes a ton of wearable devices and flexible electronics for both, implantable devices as well as, skin surface devices. And we are his thermal flow sense company. And I'll get to what that means in just a second. I guess in terms of kind of how the company came about. So, Dr. Rogers, he was doing, grand rounds in the Department of Neurosurgery over at Northwestern one day talking about his flexible electronics. And there were a couple of neurosurgeons that came up to him after the talk and said, "Hey, have you thought about applications within neurosurgery? Particularly in the hydrocephalus application." And he hadn't, but he was intrigued. The neurosurgeons, Dr. Rogers and a PhD student, now co-founder at the time, kind of did some work on the bench, with some models of hydrocephalus, and they said that looked good, and then they did a clinical study over at Northwestern. That data looked good, and then at that point they said, okay, maybe we have something here that is beyond a nice academic paper. So they decided to kind of form early Rhaeos, the company, but they were academics and neurosurgeons, that sort of thing. So they're not ones to kind of
Clinical in nature.
right,
Yeah.
clinical and nature research. They're not ones to kind of hit the road and fundraise and build the company, that sort of thing. And that's kind of where I came along. So I had been consulting to a number of medical device companies, primarily in Chicago, for almost 2 decades, wearing many hats: venture capital, tech transfer, leading regulatory quality, that sort of thing. And I had been consulting to 2 other of Dr. Rogers' companies. He's got a number of companies. And then, one day he gave me this grant to look at that focused on FlowSense, which is the first product of Rhaeos. And I just stopped what I was doing. I stopped in my tracks and was like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
For many reasons. First of all, I come from a PMA, so for class 3 device world, implantables, highly invasive devices, to come across a wearable skin surface,
Right.
I was like, holy fresh of breath, breath of fresh air, right? I'm like, this is
Yeah.
fantastic. And just the fact that it goes with skin and it's a diagnostic, I'm like, I'm into it. And then plus, it was initially focusing on hydrocephalus. And, I've come across so many companies, and even in VC, I've never seen a deal on hydrocephalus. And I'm like, okay, you got my attention now. I want to dig
Right.
into it. So, the more I learned about the company, the more I wanted in. So I dropped everything I was doing, and I was, consulting to a number of companies. I served as senior management. I just stopped. My husband thought I was a little crazy, right? Because,
Right.
we had just, had our second child, moved into a new house, and I'm like, I'm going to run a startup, right?
Right.
I think it was one of those now or never movie moments. So I said,
Sure.
I'm just going to do it. And then, we hit the ground running. And I was employee number 1. So it was exciting, but also very scary, right? Because it's just like, I kind of was a catalyst for the transition of the company to more of a commercial entity. So, I came in, and then, Professor Rogers, continued with his, lab, and the neurosurgeon, continued in surgery. And then, the other co-founder, continued a postdoc over at MIT. So then I was alone, but I'm like, you know what? I've been doing startups for a long time. I'm going to phone some friends up. So I called up, some people that I had been working
Friends
with.
and family network. Yep.
Yeah, friends and family within the startup community. I'm like, hey, Eric, hey, Adam, what are you doing? You got to join me in the startup. We don't have any money, but it's going to be great. I
Right.
promise. Right. So they're like, okay, Anna Lisa, we'll see how this goes. And, for the past 2 years, we've done so much, and have grown tremendously. So we went from, one employee myself to now we have, 12 folks on payroll, a couple consultants. So, that's kind of like a high level about, the
Yeah.
genesis of risk, but happy to go into more.
Yeah. What was that like for you? When you look at when you look at your bio, you're definitely never at risk of being unemployed.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody has been able to manage as many jobs at the same time as you have in the past. So, what was that like? Dropping. You're probably consulting for several companies.
Yeah.
Maybe you're working directly for some companies. What was that
Yeah.
like when you're in that moment and you say, okay, I'm going to go do this, and
Yeah.
then you're employee number one, and
Right.
all three of the founders are kind of looking at you, and
Right.
was that a little unnerving?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lot of pressure, right? I could have, stayed as a consultant, playing supportive roles for the rest of my professional life. I was comfortable, great life, it, paid the bills, everyone was happy, that sort of thing. But as I said, it was kind of one of those moments that you see in the movies where you just kind of like take a leap. And it was one of those things where I said, okay, I've been a part of a number of companies, seen so many deals, and I've never come across technology like this that comes out of this guy's lab.
Right.
I think at the end of the day, like the technology has to be really solid, like really
Yeah.
solid. And Professor Rogers, he pumps out a paper a week. He's got a whole
Yeah.
wing of a building at Northwestern. So there's something there. So I knew that I
Right.
could, from everything that I've been through for the past 2 decades, I knew I could take those experiences, over to Rhea. So while, being employee number one, that being, super, overwhelming and frightening, that sort of thing, uh, I realized that, all my experiences through all this time have actually prepared me for this role. And I didn't even know.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's funny how when you make a change like that, you start to see um, all of the collection, the aggregation of all
Yeah.
your experiences previously coming out here in recruitment or coming out
Right.
here in fundraising or all of
Yeah.
those different things come into play when you're pulling the strings
Yeah.
when you're the el jefe, as they say.
Right.
Let's dig into the product a little bit. If anybody out there listening has any experience with hydrocephalus, they will agree it's there. One of the things that really intrigued me when I started researching this was just this is like one of the most unmet needs I've ever come across
Yeah.
in my 20 plus years in the business, and it is debilitating to say the least. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously it can be fatal if not addressed, but it's an incredibly unmet need. So I'm surprised that there hasn't been more development in this space. Why don't we start with tell us a little bit about FlowSense, like kind of an overview of it. How does it work? What does it do? And why is it so unique?
Yeah, let me actually show you first. I have them here with me. So here's a, flow sensor, the sensor. It's a, flexible, kind of, looks like a bumpy Band-Aid. So how it works is that, you know, this is a non-invasive wearable skin surface device. And, it kind of looks like a bumpy Band-Aid on the outside, but inside, and it's kind of like transparent here, are sophisticated electronics, which is kind of like the result of, years and years in the academic lab, and then transitioned to, this was made by our contract manufacturer. But how this sensor works is that you place it on the skin overlying the shunt. So in patients with hydrocephalus, the main treatment is the placement of a shunt, which essentially drains the brain of excess cerebrospinal fluid. So hydrocephalus is characterized by excess CSF, that brain fluid, and that fluid
Right.
has to go somewhere, right? So shunts are placed in. It's an invasive neurosurgery. Starts in the ventricles that make the fluid, tunnels, down the neck and into the peritoneum where it drains. So, there's no technology available today that can easily wirelessly assess exactly what's going in that shunt that is prone to failure. So it's tubing. So things can get clogged up in there. Patients can get infected. It can dislodge, that sort of thing. So, right now imaging is used for diagnosis, but it's inconclusive, expensive, and exposes patients to radiation. And there's no technology that can tell you, hey, what's going on inside that shunt. And that's where this thing comes in.
Yeah.
So this sensor goes on the patient's skin overlying the shunt. So I don't have a shunt,
So it's
but
right around the clavicle
yeah,
area.
right on the clavicle, exactly. So it's placed there because that's, the shunt is palpable around that region because you have this, bony protuberance, right?
Right.
So, how it works is that, it's battery operated, and we apply a little bit of heat to the skin surface overlying the shunt. And if it's battery operated, and if there is flow within that shunt, that heat that we're delivering, which is imperceptible to the user. So this device has been on a bunch of babies and even, seniors. And if there's flow within that shunt, that heat dissipates in the direction of flow. We have
Okay.
sensors within the sensor that pick up the activity, kick off that information to a mobile app via Bluetooth. And then we have this magical algorithm that can tell the clinician in a matter of minutes if there's flow or no flow, as well as quantitative information about flow. And that's really important for clinicians, because right now there's a lot of guesswork. They observe patient symptomatology. They look at MRI imaging, and with patient symptoms, the common symptoms are headaches, dizziness, nausea, which can be things that
The
you and I,
flu.
yeah, exactly. It
Yeah.
could be a bad day, that sort of thing. And imaging really takes a snapshot of ventricles. So this is like another weapon that clinicians can use to really assess exactly what's going on within the shunt.
Does it work in such that it can tell either it's A clogged or B not clogged, or is it binary, or can they say, "Hey, we're getting partial flow"? How indicative is it?
Yeah. So first, it can tell the clinician if there's flow or no flow, within the shunt. And then, recently we were actually awarded a huge grant from the National Institute of Health for $4 million to quantify that flow. Now that's key right there.
Yeah.
Like doing flow rate. So we have this huge grant
Right.
to not only develop our algorithms for flow rate, which we're doing right now, but also to do the outcomes based studies. And that's why the grant is so large, so that we can with our key opinion leaders, design outcome studies that will be useful from a clinical perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's amazing. It's funny. I was having this conversation with a client of mine the other day, and this digital health thing is somewhat, I don't want to say intimidating to certain
It's intimidating.
legacy med tech people that
Yeah.
they're like, a lot of people might not understand it or
Yeah.
whatever, and they think it's all of these very complicated devices that might be hard to grasp or whatever. But my opinion is while there's certainly complex components of these devices, like you said, the tremendous algorithm that you guys have, a lot of these devices are unbelievably simple.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not complicating healthcare. It's making healthcare so much more simple.
Yeah.
If you look at it from the perspective of what the alternative is, if the imaging is inconclusive, what do they do right now? Is it a surgical procedure, or how what would they do at that point?
Yeah. If the imaging is inconclusive, and if the patient's symptoms kind of don't tell the clinician one thing or the other, they actually undergo surgery to literally see if the shunt is dripping.
Is that abdominal surgery?
Yeah, exactly. They open up to just see if it's actually dripping. And that happens often. What also happens is that, they suspect a malfunction, the surgeons suspect a malfunction, and then when they open up the patients thinking they need to revise the shunt, actually see it dripping. So
Yeah.
that's a time and resource sink, right? For the healthcare system on the surgeon's time, on the patient's time, having to go through, surgery, that sort of thing. And what's very challenging for these patients is that this is a chronic, lifelong condition and there's
Yep.
no cure for it. So this is cyclical. They go to the ER, so then they go to, surgery. There's one patient actually that reached out to us recently who's had over 100 shunt revisions. It's
That's unbelievable.
unbelievable. And he said that I actually just stopped counting after 100. So he's like, a device like this would, really help me a lot because we're starting with the hospital first, and then we're also developing a home-based device.
Wow.
So, he's excited about both because he's just like, when I go to the ER, wait around for so long for imaging, or when I'm at home, I have a headache. I don't know if I need to go to the ER or not.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we're trying to help, folks like him as well as caregivers.
The family member that I know that deals with it, a
Mhm.
lot of times she doesn't, you kind of start planning your life around it, right?
Oh,
Like if
yeah.
like you don't, if you start feeling a
Yeah.
certain way,
Yep.
maybe you don't go on that vacation, or
Yeah.
maybe you
Yeah.
don't. So to have something that would be, mobile, portable, an
Exactly.
at-home like device would make a huge impact on quality
Yeah,
of life and lifestyle.
absolutely. Yeah, and I just wanna share just one because you said something that reminded me of the moment that I realized that Reyes was the company for me. So, my first week
Are
on the
you
job.
reading my notes here? Because that was going to be
Oh,
my next question. Was that was going to be my next question? Was what was the spark? What was the moment? Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So yeah, the moment was so first week on the job. Reyes was in a very early clinical study. I had the fortune of meeting a mom of a hydrocephalus patient, and she told me how she couldn't work anymore. And
Yeah.
how her daughter missed so many days of school that her full-time job is taking care of her daughter, right? And how there have been countless times that she's been to the ER, that she's had so many shunt revisions, and how her life is hard, but she, as a mom and her primary caregiver, you know, works hard day and night so that her daughter has a normal life as possible. And as she was telling me her story, I had to think happy thoughts because I'm a mom of two. Okay, so
Right.
I have a
Yeah.
9 year right, a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I'm like, and Lisa, don't cry, don't cry.
Yeah.
It'll be okay. Just, you just gotta, just keep it together. And that was just like,
Right.
I wasn't prepared, for that. I can read about it, but then when someone is in front of you telling you, how hard their life is, and then how what you're working on can help them, that's like a different feeling.
Yeah.
All sorts of feelings like, medical device developer feeling, like fellow mom feeling. It's like
Right.
all crashing into one. So it was at that moment where I was like, I'm so glad I dropped everything. I'm
Yeah.
so glad that I decided to, steer the ship and have the best team in the world that's running it.
Majority of the recruiting work that we do is with early stage companies.
Mhm.
What I tell people, especially people that we're recruiting that aren't familiar with that environment, the only certainty that I can guarantee them is there's going to be bumps along the way.
Oh
And so
yeah.
if you're going to get involved in this,
Yeah.
you better be
Buckle up.
invested at a visceral level. You better
Yeah.
have that passion that you're talking about, that you're
Yeah.
describing right now, because
Yeah.
if you don't, it's it might not be right for you, because it's hard to it's hard to push past the tough moments if you're not invested like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know what I do for some of my engineers, since we have multiple trial sites, is that I have them come, as long as it's okay with the clinician, the patient, of
Right.
course, to observe because it's a different feeling. So they're making devices in the lab to actually see it on a
Yep.
baby or
Yeah.
someone's mom. is like a different feeling, because I want them to know that what they're doing is making a difference, and I
Yeah.
want them to see it actually put on a patient. So it's more, you are more than building a device. You are building a device that can change.
Changing lives. Yeah, yeah. No, Abiomed, we used to do a lot of work early on with Abiomed, and they were fanatical about doing patients, bringing patients into the offices and
Yeah,
doing on-site patient seminars. I was back there for a recruiting summit, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, and they brought a patient in, and she's telling her story, and you're just, it was truly unbelievable, the
yeah,
story, and you're just like, wow, this is amazing, and
yeah,
it's not when you're at the workbench as an engineer, or when
yeah,
you're working on a slide deck as a marketeer,
yeah,
sometimes you lose that connection.
right.
So it's
Right.
to be uh, to place that front and center, really makes a big difference. How long is it applied for? Is it just like a momentary thing that they apply it and then they catch the readings on the iPhone, and then they make a decision, or do they have to wear it for a period of a couple days? How does that work?
A great question. So we have two products. So the first one that we're launching, knock on wood, later this year, is a hospital-facing device. So that'll be a single-use disposable, and that's can be used both in inpatient as well as outpatient ambulatory settings, and that's a spot check. So can you imagine, patient going to the ER, this the sensor would be placed on them, quick assessment bedside, is there flow or no flow, quantitative information about flow. That's a setting, our device will be used in the hospital initially. We're also developing, a home device. And let me take a step back. So that device that's worn in the hospital, in a matter of minutes, can tell you that information. But if the clinician wants additional readings, wants to keep the patient, in a bit longer, they can leave that sensor on for a total of 5 readings, and then they have to get a new one,
Got
since
it.
it's a single-use disposable. So that gets disposed of properly. But the home device, that's a reusable, rechargeable device that is for long-term
It's like an
continuous.
iWatch.
Exactly, exactly. So we're developing this kind of full package of care for the hydrocephalus patient.
That's amazing. What in terms of product development, was there any, like, what was the thing? What was the thing that kept you up at night? What was the thing that kept the engineers up at night? What was the challenge with ultimately getting something where you're like, this is where we're going, what we're going to go with?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned the technology has academic roots. So, when in that kind of setting, a lot of things are made by hand in small volumes, right? So, maybe 5 devices at a time, which works well for small trials, feasibility, paper reasons, that sort of thing. When you go into the market, into like the clinical setting, devices made by hand by a couple of people, that's not really feasible. So,
Right.
one of the challenges that we faced, the engineers primarily, and our CTO kind of steers that ship, Chad Webb, is that they were tasked of taking that lab grown device and making it ISO 1345 proper, QMS, FDA, regulation standards, so that it abides by those things, but also that it's mass manufacturable.
Hmm.
So we were fortunate to work with a contract manufacturer over in Minnesota, device capital of the world, surprise,
Right.
to kind of to work on that. So it was a relationship that we built over time, and worked very closely with them. And here we are. I wish I had kind of like the early version of the device, because the early version of the device just had the guts, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it was like a lot, it,
Primitive.
at the time, it's very primitive, and then it kind of evolved. Maybe that's something that I'll have in the future in, like, our office, kind of like the evolution of the
That
device.
would be really cool. Yeah. Have it
Yeah,
framed with all of the different,
right.
yeah,
Exactly, exactly. So,
generations.
making sure that it was not only designed under quality, but and mass manufacturable, but that it also was as good or even better than the thing that was developed in the lab. And
Right.
so, that takes time, to do. But, hired some smart folks, and work magic. I like to say that, so my whole team, even my marketing and finance folks, have engineering backgrounds.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
the only one on the team who's not an engineer by trade, but I'm smart enough to hire it.
Right. Right.
So,
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, they gave me biomedical, like, for instance, our finance person, even though he's a biomedical engineer by trade, but he was also an investment banker. So it's just like, engineers can do anything.
Yep. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I wish I had more of an engineering mind than I do. I oftentimes find myself looking at what engineers do,
Yeah,
and just think, wow, process wise, I wonder what they went through
right.
to take that from here to here, or point A to
Yeah,
point B. It's
yeah,
definitely a neat approach to life in general. What in terms of like the regulatory
yeah.
process, I would think the FDA's they've come around, I guess is a good way to say it. It used to be like you'd send your stuff to them and then you just never hear back from them, and then one day you get a letter like you're approved or you're not approved, right?
We need more information.
Or we need more information.
Yeah,
Exactly. Now I've heard that it's much more collaborative. They want these devices to come to market, so it's
yeah,
maybe it used to feel a little bit more adversarial, where now it's more collaborative.
yeah.
How has your guys' experience been? I would think that they would be dying to get something like this with the dire need in the marketplace. They'd want to get something like this, uh, uh, you know, out into the commercially available. Is it has it been a good experience? Has it been challenging with what they've asked of you guys? How has that gone?
Our relationship with the FDA is fantastic. They actually designated our device breakthrough.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, in 2020, which is fantastic. And for those of breakthrough designation allows for more frequent interaction with the
Right.
FDA. We definitely took advantage of that, and also an expedited review and prioritization of your application. We've talked to the FDA 4 times already.
That's
Which
great.
is great. In my past lives in startups, it takes so much time to land on the FDA's calendar for traditional pre-sub, but because we're breakthrough, we can have a meeting with the FDA within a couple weeks. And the interactions, even on email or phone, can be more informal, that sort of thing. So that alone has been such a win for Reyes. And I think they also, really like the FlowSense device too, because they recognize, the need for something like this for these patients who, continuously suffer, right? So,
Right.
hydrocephalus is not a condition that is talked about every day.
Right.
It does affect, over 1 million Americans. A lot of people live with it, and they realize the value of this diagnostic. And we've heard from them directly that they're excited for this to be used in the clinic.
Am I correct in this that the failure rate is literally 100% for shunts?
Yeah, it's not a matter of if, but it's when.
Right. That's unbelievable. So why, we're getting it off track a little bit here, but why do you think there hasn't been more energy directed towards this from the community in the past? I mean, the market's clearly there. I'm just surprised with, that something hasn't come out sooner than now. Do you have an opinion on that? What do you think?
I think it has to do, a lot of innovation stems from, academic labs. And for academic labs, to survive, they need, a lot of funding for, particular work. I don't think there's been a tremendous amount of, dollars on the academic side for hydrocephalus in particular. I think dollars have been spent, in other, chronic conditions. So if the dollars aren't there on the early side, then you're not gonna there's no dollars to develop, the technology. There's also, focus on, therapeutics for, hydrocephalus. I'm a device person. A very brief moment in my life, I was pharma, but it was on a repurposed deal. And even then that was, kind of sucking for me. So it kind of went back, time sucking. Not that it sucked. It was great.
Right.
There's a long path for, therapeutics. That's also expensive. And then on the device side, there has been a focus on kind of developing like therapeutic shunts too. It's no secret that there are shunts being developed right now. Even some neurosurgeons that we're working with are looking into kind of smart shunts. The problem with smart shunts is that they have a much like longer path to commercialization. They're a higher risk. We're class two de novo,
Right.
510K. A smart shunt, that's PMA, large dollars. There's some appetite for that, but that's like, that's a much longer path. And there's, reimbursement, regulatory, commercial hurdles, that sort of thing. So, I think there's just all sorts of barriers, I would say, kind of in, I guess, more innovation. That's, prohibiting more innovation within hydrocephalus.
When I got into the business in the late 90s, my mentors always said, stay on the therapeutic side. Don't go into
Hmm.
diagnostics. The money's always in the
Hmm.
therapeutic side. And they
Sure.
were right. They were right
Yeah.
at the time. And then products like this, I call these the Obamacare products because when Obamacare came in, everything shifted to low readmissions, early
Hmm.
diagnosis,
Yep.
early ambulation, and value-based care, right?
Yeah.
And so you can always tell what's going to be hot in our space by following the money, right? Like where
Yeah.
when CMS started putting a lot of money into those types of products, all of it, then you started to see a ton of money flowing into it from the venture community, which has
Yeah.
created like just an amazing market.
Yeah.
And also I think a lot of VCs steered clear of medtech because of things you just mentioned with the regulatory hurdles and
Hmm.
whatnot. It was, it's a riskier bet, when you could just go give your money to somebody who's going to create a new dating app or something,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever it is. And so I think a lot of those traditional tech investors have now heavily migrated into our space because, like you said, it's de novo 510K.
Yeah.
It's de-risked significantly in comparison to what a lot of our devices
Yeah.
typically would encounter. So that
Yeah.
makes perfectly good sense. Who's the for the product that you guys are working with now? Obviously, the at-home device will be a little bit different, but who's the buyer and who's the end user? Is it
Yeah.
the hospital buys it and then the neurologist applies it, or how does it? What's the process look like?
Yeah. Yeah. So, for
And this is forward looking, obviously.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it'll be, purchased by the hospitals, and it'll be used by, neurosurgeons, ER doctors, neurologists. Those, kind of qualified clinicians that interact with, the hydrocephalus patients. So, it can be used in, regular kind of health check visits. At kind of like your annual visits. It can also be used,
Clinic.
yeah, in the clinic. Exactly. It can be used in the ER. And then the market opportunity that we're initially targeting is really the inpatient stay. So after a post-op, a newly placed shunt. On average, a patient can stay in the hospital 2 or 3 days, but if you look at like kind of like the NICU, PICUs, they can stay for months, that sort of thing. So, our device can be used before they get discharged, or during their each day during their length of stay.
Wow, that's great. That's neat. And then the at-home device, will that be
Yeah.
something that is like over the counter, or you'll need a prescription for, or how would that work? Or do you have it figured out yet?
Yeah, yeah, great question. I'm so excited about the remote wearable. I think that the pandemic has really shined a light on remote monitoring devices.
Absolutely.
And so this will be, also a regulated device. So this isn't something that you can, pick up at a retail store.
CVS or
Yeah,
whatever.
CVS. I mean, you can probably get it at the pharmacy for pickup, kind of like
Right.
continuous glucose monitors, that sort of thing. But it'll be a regulated device, since it will, impact clinical care, that sort of thing. So, but, reusable, rechargeable, excited about that. But the neurosurgeon or neurologist will need to, write a script for that.
So when do you guys anticipate that the first device? Obviously, this is all speculative, but I always have to make sure we cover all the regulatory and legal. Are you guys targeting a certain time frame for approval, or?
So we're in our pivotal study right now. So it's a multi-center study, 8 sites, or is it 9? 8 or 9 sites across the United States. We just added a new one, and really looking to wrap that study up, by the summer, submit our regulatory application, and, that'll go under review. The goal is to get it approved, by the end of the year, or it could be, early next year. It's really in the hands of, the FDA. But as I mentioned before, fortunately, we have that breakthrough designation for the, prioritization of our application, and then we'll be ready to sell the product.
The fun stuff begins then, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I think a lot of companies, at least I've seen in my experience, kind of see the regulatory approval as, that's the finish line that you cross. It's
Right.
not. It's like another mile marker, right? Maybe even like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a marathon, if that's like a quarter of a way or halfway there. But anyway, it's a mile marker.
Half marathon, we'll call
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Halfway. Yeah. So, but there's such a long road ahead. So, we're ready to launch, and kind of hopefully get these devices in the hands of clinicians.
You've obviously got a ton of experience with countless device, launches and whatnot, multiple different commercial. I mean, you've seen a ton of different commercial strategies and processes and ways to roll out new technologies. What do you think the biggest challenge will be from from a commercial perspective with this? Is
Yeah.
it, and maybe if you can, it might be a little premature, but to share any, key insights on, kind of like, do you think you're going to go direct to consumer, or, from a marketing perspective, obviously not from a sales perspective, but um, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think that as this is a a regulated device that will always be prescribed by the clinician. I think that the biggest challenge is really data.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, for any new device, it is not likely that a clinician will just use a device just because it's 510(k) cleared or de novo stamped. It's they'll want to see the data. So the study that we're doing now is one of multiple studies that we plan to do in order to get the clinicians accepting of the
Yeah.
device. So this is a journey, right? So I mean, you got to get the regulatory clearance or approval, and then you have to build the data. In many ways, it's kind of similar to kind of like an Amazon review, right? You look at the reviews when you're
Right.
looking at a product,
Right.
like
Right. Right. Yeah.
3 stars, no thanks. It's got to be
Yeah.
four and a
Yeah.
half stars or higher, that sort of thing. And the
Right.
clinician wants to see, like, well, I want to see the data, and they say, well, who's using the device?
Who's
Who's
using it?
that?
Yep.
Yeah, it's like so and so over, on the West Coast using it. Okay, so it's like it's a combination of things. It's getting the acceptance of the clinicians, and that's primarily driven by really good data, and then also just adoption. And that's also part of our strategy right now is just we have a number of sites that we're working with, but the folks that we're working with, these are KOLs. So like I said, it takes a while. It is a challenge, but it's not something that we weren't and aren't prepared for.
Will it be like a high? Do you think you'll probably go more with a direct in the field sales force, or will you possibly deploy like an in-house hybrid model where you'll have like SDRs in house? And my background is on the commercial side, and
Sure.
so I'm always interested to hear people's thoughts on how this market is changing
Yeah.
from, pre-pandemic. We had, everybody just kind of went about things the way we always have, whether it worked or not. We did it because it was just the way we had always done it. And the pandemic forced people to look at things differently. Are you guys looking at any innovative sales models, or do you think you'll go with a more traditional in-field team?
I think the pandemic has really enabled us to have a bigger reach to neurosurgeons. So, back in 2020 and 2019, I had all these flights booked so I can meet with the neurosurgeons, and the pandemic hit, and then I shift to a digital world, and my heart was like kind of broken because I like talking with people in person. Things like just talking through folks through Zoom or whatever you use enabled us to talk to more
Yeah.
clinicians than we planned.
Yep.
And in many ways, that's our early sales strategy is, kind of, developing those relationships, getting those clinicians, comfortable with what we're doing, getting them on board to do the clinical trial. And, if they like how it's going with the clinical trial, then those are our first customers.
Yep.
So, when we launch, we're not going to have a huge, sales team, because we've already, over the
Yeah.
past 2 years, that is like the silver lining with the pandemic, is that we have, so many, neurosurgeon friends, now that are, excited about the technology. So we'll have, a handful of sales folks for kind of like our wave one, type
Yeah.
hospitals. But then that'll stick to more traditional means as we go, broadly, more broad.
What you just said is, to anybody, anybody listening is going to, I would highly advise paying attention to what you just said, because that is undoubtedly, I support exactly what you just said. The face to face engagement is never going to go away. There's always going to be
Yeah,
a need to have that engagement. But whether you're communicating through LinkedIn or through Zoom or whatever, the digital components of the process allow you to front load the process, and
yep,
there's much less time is needed when you get in front of that individual.
right,
You don't have to show subject matter expertise. They
right,
already know you're a subject matter expert.
yeah,
You don't have to show that there's viability and proof of concept in the product. You don't have to show that there's clinical benefit. The in-person part, it will always be needed to
yeah,
close the deal, so to speak.
yeah,
But I believe you could be so much more effective utilizing a digital component of it on the front end. And I don't know why more companies aren't doing that. I don't know if it's just because they're afraid that they might be wrong, and are afraid to try new things. But it's exciting to hear that you guys have instituted that, and we'll be
yeah.
definitely looking cheering you guys on from the sidelines for
Thank
sure.
you, thank you.
I'd like to give you guys an opportunity, for people out there. Hopefully the listeners are listening because they're wanting to stay abreast of the hottest technologies on the market,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, whether it's just personal interest or for career interest or whatever. If people are interested in the therapy, for themselves or somebody that they might know, or for those that might be interested, in potentially joining a team like
Yeah.
Rhaeos, what's the call to action? How can people get in touch with you guys? Is there a way for them to reach out? And if so, what would you prescribe?
Yeah, absolutely. You can visit our website, www.rhaeos.com, rhaeos.com. We're also very active on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Reach out to me, send me a note. I'm always looking at, my messages, that sort of thing. I'm also active on Twitter. One of my investors slash mentors, told me, in terms of team building, Anna Lisa, you're always going to be recruiting, whether
Yeah.
it's for today, whether it's for a month from now, whether it's for, a year from now. So I'm always happy to chat with folks who, have, interest in, particular skills, and, for, working at Rayos. Because my approach to hiring is, like, I like to talk to the individual first,
Right.
just to kind of see what kind of skill sets they bring, and how some of those skills can translate into different areas of needs within Rails. And then I also, like to, see if, culturally, the person can fit, within the company. We have a small team. It's growing, 12 folks, but we all work very closely. And I got to make sure that there's, like, a personality fit, also a mission fit, that sort of thing. And once these, the boxes check, then we kind of progress. And then I say,
Right.
you know what, you might be actually good for this position over here. Or, you know what, like, I'm not ready now, but, a few months from now, as, we, kind of progress on the regulatory side, let's have another, conversation, as long as, you're still looking, that sort of thing. Yeah.
You always have to be recruiting, especially in a
Oh,
market like this.
it's so tough.
It's imperative. Yeah, it really,
Yeah.
really is. Well, listen, hey, I really appreciate you coming on today. I have no doubt that you guys are poised for great success, and I mean it when I say you guys are doing a great thing out there.
Thank
There is
you.
it is a hugely unmet need, and I'll be looking forward to the day when I see the press release that you guys get approval and you're ready to rock and roll. And
Awesome.
then when things do happen or do evolve, maybe we can get you to come back on the show and do a recap of where you're
Yeah,
at. So
happy to do it.
absolutely. Well, listen, that's Anna Lisa Somera from Rhaeos, and thanks guys for listening. And I appreciate you joining us today, Anna Lisa.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. Take care.
Okay.